Welcome back to the Shepherd's Pie, a slice of faith for our messy lives. I'm Tony Kolenc, a professor at Ave Maria School of Law. I'm the father of 5 grown children and the author of inspirational fiction for both adults and teenagers. I'm waiting on pins and needles as we are recording because Book 5 in my Harwood Mystery Series, Murder at Penwood Manor, has become a finalist at the 2024 Excellence in Publishing Awards for the Association of Catholic Publishers in 2 categories, teens and also just fiction. So hopefully be hearing soon on that. Just really feeling thankful to Loyola for such a great job they do putting those books together. But today I'm actually going to be speaking with Becky Van Vleet about the greatest generation and the importance of faith when facing life's events that need nothing short of divinely inspired courage. My guest today is Becky Van Vleet. She is a retired teacher and principal, and also an award-winning multi-genre author. She is the author of a recent devotional book called What's in Your Purse, and she's also been published in several other venues, including Guideposts, the Country Register, and Lighthouse Academy. And in fact, her children's picture books are the recipients of several awards also. Especially significant to our discussion today, Becky is the author of Unintended Hero, which is a true story about her father's battles, experiences, and adventures in World War II aboard the USS Denver. She is passionate about sharing the values from the greatest generation, and she frequently speaks to high school classes about patriotism. Becky, it is so great to have you on the Shepherd's Pie.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate this opportunity.
You are writing in just about every genre I can think of. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in writing.
Truth be told, I did not like writing, not in high school, not in college. Sometimes I would even stress out if I had a writing assignment or an essay. It was just not my thing. But when I retired just a few years ago, I decided I wanted to write a little story about this traveling skirt in our family that had been traveling around for about 70 years through 3 generations. And my idea was to just write up a little, like a Word document, to pass along to our family members and just preserve this little story. But once I really got going with it, I thought, maybe I could turn this into a little children's book. And so that was the first open door for me to start a writing journey. And I was just really blessed with a traditional publisher who took that story. And so that first little book was published about 6 years ago. And so I just thought, I've got more traveling objects in our family. I bet I could write a few more of these and it could become a series. That's really how I started writing. But honestly, in my wildest dreams, I never thought I would write an adult novel.
Now, I see you're a retired teacher and a principal. What kinds of teaching did you do, and maybe any stories from there?
Yes, I taught 3rd grade for a few years when we married, and then we started our family, and I became a stay-at-home mother, and eventually I started teaching some college classes at a vocational college, and then later I did go back into full-time teaching once our family was raised, and then I became a principal of a homeschool program at a charter school where I live in Colorado Springs.
Now, of course, as you mentioned, none of that seems to scream out adult novel, and yet your first novel was for adults called Unintended Hero about your dad. So maybe tell us a little bit about how did you decide that that was the one to start with?
It goes back to 1990, and I would have to say it's just one of these things that I never imagined that when I sat my father down at my kitchen table in 1990 and we would start talking about World War II, that later on those conversations would turn into a book. But God works in mysterious ways, and that's exactly what happened. But I grew up in a home where both of my parents participated in World War II, but I can't say they talked a lot about it. I knew my father was in the Navy and he was on a ship, the USS Denver, but I really did not have a lot of information about what he did and what he accomplished and just fighting in World War II. What was that like? So in 1990, I was a mother with 4 children, and this was a busy time in my life, but I just felt like I really needed to capture my father's stories for my children, actually, because I knew when they got older, they would take American history in high school and they would study World War II. And so my father was very cooperative. And of course, being the good grandpa that he was very willing to share his stories and let me record him. And so when all was said and done, I had about 2 hours worth of his stories on his ship, boot camp, the battles, a couple of close calls with death. And I knew I had a treasure trove. Well, like I said, I was a busy mother and I put the cassettes away. I didn't forget about them, but I just really didn't take any action at the time. And my father passed away about 8 years later. So I was really, really glad that I took the time to get his stories, record them, and have something that I could pass along to our family members. We raised our family, our children grew up and got married and had children of their own, and I became a grandmother. And then COVID hit. So we're talking really just about 3 years ago. I was in the house by myself, and my grandchildren could not come over to play. I could not go play with my grandchildren. And I thought, this is a good time to get out my cassettes and listen to my dad's stories. So that's what I did. And I thought, now is the time to really start writing this out for our family. Well, I started researching and I found out on the internet that the USS Denver had so many things available on public domain. For example, all of their deck logs for the whole time the ship was participating in World War II were on public domain. And these deck logs are like journal entries. Every 4 hours, someone on that ship was recording exactly what that ship was doing, where it was, longitude, latitude, weather, what battles, what ammunition was being expended, and all kinds of things. So I thought, wow, I've got a lot of information now that I can put these pieces together with my father's stories. I also contacted some living World War II veterans who were in the Navy on ships to get their stories as well so that I could really hear firsthand from them what their experiences were and how did they really feel about fighting in the war and their sacrifices and things like that. And then my husband and I decided to take a couple of research trips. And one of those trips took us to Buffalo, New York, where we toured the Naval Military Park. And at this Naval Military Park, they had one World War II Cleveland class cruiser ships, which is exactly like my dad's ship. And so when we toured that, I could really see firsthand what life would have been like for my dad in World War II because he was on that ship, his ship, for 3 years. And so, oh my goodness, that really helped me tremendously to really visualize, where he slept, what the kitchen galley looked like, walking through those hatches and things like that. And so I thought, okay, I've got a lot now. I can really go to town with this story. The more I typed, the longer it got. And finally, one day I told my husband, I really think I could turn this into a book. And I really came to appreciate the greatest generation as I was researching and, not just writing my father's story, but just, everything that was going on with my dad's ship and the battles. And so when all was said and done, I just really walked away with a great appreciation for the greatest generation. And I feel like I was able to pull all that together and include that in this novel that I wrote, which really circles around my father, but I wrote it in such a way that had a lot of history in it and what the greatest generation contributed to the war.
So tell us, I mean, you've mentioned your father obviously a bunch here, and I know faith is going to factor into this. So before we get into maybe some of the harrowing tales that your dad had to endure, maybe just spend a minute or two telling us about your dad and where did faith intersect with his life as far as you knew?
He was raised in a faith-believing home, He told me that in his growing up years, his family always prayed, and that was important to him. It was very important to him when he was on the ship. He shared with me that when he had these close calls with death, that's all he did was just pray that God would save his life. I know that faith was very important to him as a teenager on that ship. And truthfully, this was a time period that the greatest generation, a lot of them were church going families. This was common during that time period. But after he and my mother married, they were very active in their faith and their church. He was a song leader. We had attended an a cappella Church of Christ for a good number of years, and he was our song leader and a very prayerful man. And so those values were passed along to me. And I view that as just one of my most tremendous blessings that my parents were able to pass their faith along to me.
And did you get a sense from your dad that at the time that he was in World War II, his faith was really in an active place? Because I know a lot of young people, whether they're going off to college or going off to war, sometimes find it challenging to stay true to their faith, even if they were raised with it.
What happened right before World War II is that his older brother was on the USS San Francisco, and that ship was at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. So his brother was at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked, and his brother lived. The USS San Francisco was fortunate in that it was not attacked the way a lot of the other ships were, but that whole family was very fearful. They did not hear for several days what had happened to the USS San Francisco, so they did not know if my father's older brother had made it through or not, but he did. At the time, my father was 16 and he was a junior in high school. That call to fight for America just came loud and clear. And not only to him, but a lot of his high school friends, they quit high school. So when my dad turned 17, spring of his junior year, he did not finish high school. He joined the Navy. And I believe it was the faith that he felt like he needed to cling to and keep on embracing was really because of how scared the family was with his older brother. His life was spared, but yet it was such a traumatic thing for the country for what happened at Pearl Harbor.
All right, so maybe share one or two of the stories that you think are particularly illustrative of, faith facing some, sort of these difficult events in life that require courage that your dad might have gone through on the USS Denver.
Well, one specifically was when the USS Denver was torpedoed and it was dead in the water in a very active battle. It lost its engines. It was hit by a torpedo in the engine room. And so there were 20 men who were killed and it was just dead in the water. And so a lot of the sailors, keep in mind, a lot of these are teenage boys. They were very fearful, very afraid. And they had practiced these drills. And one of the drills they had practiced was called abandon ship. Well, they were not supposed to abandon the ship unless they got the command to do so from the captain. But because the ship was just dead in the water and it was an active battle and the sailors were very fearful, they all started lowering the ropes and lowering the lifeboats and putting on life jackets and all kinds of things to get off of the ship. But my dad did not want to do that. He just felt like he had been trained to not take any action unless it came from the captain. He saw all of his buddies starting to get off the ship, but he stayed, he was a gunner. So he stayed with the guns. And this is the time that he said he just got on his knees and prayed because he really was fearful the whole ship was just going to blow up. But he stayed at his station while everybody else was getting off. And what happened was that the captain had no way to communicate with the sailors. The intercom system was out. They had no electrical systems in place. So the captain got on his megaphone and he shouted down to all of the sailors who were getting down into the water to get back on the ship. And he said, "We're going to save this ship if we have to push it in, but get back on the ship." And so they did, and it was that fortitude and that spirit from really the captain to save the ship that they all pulled together. There were 1,200 on this ship, and they all pulled together, and the ship was okay. They got it going 6 knots an hour, creeping inch by inch to the closest place to get it out of the battle and to get temporary repairs. But my father did say during those scary, scary moments that he said, that's all I knew to do. I just knew I needed to pray.
Yeah, no, I can imagine how. Give us another one. This is pretty
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So there was another time. So, okay, so that ship went through 3 temporary repairs, at the closest dock that they could get it to. And then it was able to sail on to another area for more temporary repairs. And then it was good enough to sail to Pearl Harbor, where it went under more temporary repairs. And from there, it had to go to Mare Island Shipyard in San Francisco for the final repairs. And during that time, the ship was there for 4 months. And my father had Liberty leave. And that's another story in and of itself, what happened when my dad was on Liberty leave. But anyway, so the ship is totally repaired, ready to go back into full battle again. It was just really a few months later, because my dad was a gunner, he got the command from the captain to go on a barge with several of the other gunners to go retrieve a certain kind of shell, a certain kind of ammunition that they were low on. And so, my dad was kind of afraid to do this. And once again, he's just a young boy. By this time, he's only 19. This is like a couple years later. He's 19. But you do what you need to do. He followed the captain's orders, and he was out on a barge with a few other gunners to go retrieve these armor-piercing shells. Well, he had to get these from the USS Hood. When they got to the USS Hood, the person on that ship who was in charge of transporting these ammunitions said, I'm sorry, we are out. We have no more of these shells, but you need to go to this other ship and they can supply you. So keep in mind, this is an ammunition ship, this USS Hood. That's all it has is ammunition. And so my dad and the other gunners, they got the barge going again, and they left. They were away for about 10 minutes when that USS Hood totally exploded. It was not because of a battle. No one knows for sure what caused that ship to explode, but not only was every person on that ship killed, but others were killed from other close by areas as well. And the damage from that USS Hood put in a dent in the bottom of that part of the ocean that was like more than a couple of ships in length. The damage was just horrific. But my father and the other young boys on that barge were just petrified in fear. And of course, they were protecting their heads. They had helmets on because all that debris and the scattering of that explosion was just raining down on top of them. So this was the second time he really did feel like we're done because of how loud that explosion was, how it rained down on them. And he just thought, well, we're going under too. Well, of course they didn't, and they were able to make it safely to another ship. But it was just such a frightening experience to see the demise of that ammunition ship right before his eyes.
So, what lessons do you draw from your dad's experiences talking to him? What can we, apply from this today when we face our own challenges in our lives?
Tony, I would have to say what I learned from my father and really from these other World War II living veterans that I was able to speak with and the research that I did is that to keep our fortitude, keep our faith, and to pray, and that we might fall upon tough times. The tough times for these Americans who were participating in World War II, they were in a war, and so they knew what risks they were up against, to fight in the war. They knew that they might not make it home. And I think today, when we have our own challenges and we go through hard times and we have all kinds of risks that we're always taking. But what I learned from my father is we have faith in God, we trust God, life is fragile. And, that this world is not our permanent home, it's our temporary home. God will honor our prayers. He will hear our prayers. If we're on a barge in World War II and a ship has just exploded and we think, we're going under too, God is not too busy. He will get us through our challenges. And that's really what I learned from both of my parents. Like I said earlier, this greatest generation really demonstrated fortitude and patriotism and teamwork and sacrifice. And they were all about their faith in God, their faith in each other, their faith in their families, their faith in their country was just like no other. I don't think we've experienced that in America really since that time.
One of the things, as I'm hearing you talk about faith and war, and then the experience with the hood, which is just horrific to think about. And I don't know if your dad talked about this or if you have any thoughts on this. It's kind of a tough, tough question, I guess. You mentioned every person on the hood was killed. And so, in war, we see that there are people who are going to die, and those people also probably have faith. And some people might look at that and say, oh, what about them? What about their faith? How did that help them? Did you have any lessons to take away from your dad on dealing with when things go the worst, and still somehow keeping faith?
Well, I will tell you, one of the things that my father shared with me was that he had never seen death. So keep in mind, Pearl Harbor was attacked when he was 16, so he was pretty young. He had never had anybody in his family to die. He had not been to a funeral. So he said to start seeing death up close and personal was shocking to him. But he said it wasn't just him, it was all of his shipmates. But this was just their calling to fight for America. He told me more than once, he said, I was just a 17-year-old skinny kid, but he said, I became a man overnight because of what I was called to do and what I saw, what I witnessed. And he said, war is ugly, but he stepped up to the plate. And I know that's what these other 16 million Americans also did. Their love of country, Tony, was just so strong. And they were very patriotic. And they knew that war was ugly and there were risks involved, but it was just everybody pulled together. No one thought about, well, America is just really not all that important. Freedom is not all that important. No, that was not the mindset. Freedom and supporting the country, supporting the values that America stood for was very important to that generation. And so, yeah, they, even with these harrowing experiences and death up close and risking their lives, this was just part of who they were. It was part of their identity as Americans to fight for their country. And I will also say that these young men and women were children during the Great Depression. They were just kids, 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds. And they saw their parents pull together for teamwork and help one another survive that Great Depression. And both of my parents said sometimes they did not know where their next meal was coming from. And they stood in bread lines, to get a little piece of bread, maybe their only food for the day. And they had holes in their shoes if they even had shoes. So this was a tough time for Americans during that Great Depression. So fast forward 10 years, these kids, who survived that, they watched their parents pull together and do whatever it took to survive. It was kind of like they were primed and ready and groomed for World War II because they knew what it took. They understood what sacrifice was. They understood teamwork. And so I really do feel like the Great Depression really played into the fortitude and the courage of this greatest generation.
All right, let me ask you one more thing then. If you had a listener who was kind of confronting something in their own lives, it might not be a ship being torpedoed, but it might feel like that in their personal lives. Any faith lessons for that person?
Tony, I think it just really boils down to not giving up. When everyone else is going against what you believe in and what you know to be right, just don't waver. Keep your faith. Stay strong to what your values are, and always pray. I would say that's the bottom line, is to pray. That's our communication to our Heavenly Father, to our Creator. And God honors our prayers. He hears our prayers.
Sounds like great advice. All right, so if folks are interested in getting a hold of this novel, Unintended Hero, or your devotional, What's in Your Purse, or some of your kids' books, or even just learning more about you, where would you like them to go?
Well, a couple places. First of all, my books are all on Amazon and at Barnes and Noble. So if anyone is interested in checking out my books, those would be two great places to go. But I would also like to tell your listeners that I would love for them to go to my website, www.beckyvanvleet.com, and that's BECKYVANVLEET.com. I am very passionate about family stories. I have a blog. Once a month, I send out a family story, either my own or a guest. The commonality in all of these books are family stories. They all center around family stories, even my devotion book.
Beautiful. It has been wonderful having you on the show and thinking back on the greatest generation and their faith and your dad's faith. Just really appreciate you sharing all that with us today.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate it.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the show today. We've been speaking with Becky Van Vleet about the greatest generation and the importance of faith when we're facing events that require divine courage to really deal with them. Again, this is Antony Barone Kolenc. If you want to check out any of my books or even book me to come speak to your homeschool group or middle school classroom, you could check out my website at antonykolenc.com. Until next time, may God bless us as we rely on our faith to work through the messy challenges of our lives.